really knew how to cook. She had some great skills. And the story goes like this. And it was a winter's day. The chief came back from hunting. He had this habit when he would come back from hunting with the men, he would throw his axe head into the side of a tree. So the next morning when he got up, he would know exactly where it was. So next morning came, he got up, he grabbed his axe head from the side of the tree, he gathered all the men, and they were manly men, and they were tough. So when they went down the hill, they went, and they were very excited to go hunting. Now when the men were gone, the women were like, whew, they're gone. So they could get down to business. Now Mokwa had a plan. She organized everybody really well. So certain people in the tribe, and you guys would all be doing work. There'd be no loafing around. It'd be work, work, work. All right? So you guys right here, you were in charge of getting the firewood, which was very important. Now think about it. There could be snow on the ground. Maybe it had rained. Maybe it was wet. You had to find plenty of firewood to keep the fire going because that was their source of heat. Can you imagine if you had no heat and it was, 10 degrees outside? Oh my God. So you had to keep that fire going all the time. So you guys were in charge of that. You guys back here, you were in charge of going and getting the water. So you ran up to the neighbor's house and you asked him to fill a bucket, right? You had to go down where there was running water. So the Passaic River is about a little over a quarter of a mile that way. So you would use containers that maybe would have been knots on the side of trees, and you'd have bigger ones than this, and you might have even balanced two of them on a stick that you'd have over your shoulder. And you had to go and you had to gather the water, and you might have to make a couple of trips back and forth gathering the water. Does that sound like easy work? No. Let's say there's ice and there's snow or there's lots of mud like you walk through. Would it be easy balancing water? Okay. So you were doing that. Some of you others were learning how to do maybe sewing or repair work on their housing. So maybe they had long houses or wickams. So you had to learn how to fix them or make new ones. Maybe you were working
Really big hole. We'll just take a whole box of bark off the tree, and then we'll get a lot of sap that way. And as the Indians learned, what did it do to the tree? It killed the tree. So all those trees died. And they were like, wow, all these trees are dead. We're building our houses here. Okay, we'll use the lumber for the houses. But wait a second, that means we're going to have to go so much farther next winter when we want to do this again. So eventually they learned that they shouldn't put those huge holes in the tree. And somebody said, well, how much of this stuff do we really need? And they said, well, we want as much as we can get, but we don't want to kill the trees. So they said, okay, let's get creative. And somebody was being creative. And what they did is they said, well, what if we just put a hole in the tree? We keep all of our water in this big barrel that has a little spigot on it that we can open and close. And what if we put the spigot into the tree? So let's drill a hole in the tree and we'll put a little spigot in there. And they tried it. Guess what? It worked. And what they did is they created something that today we call a spile. And spiles are basically straws that you put in a tree that will get the sap out for you. Now, and they wouldn't just put one spile in a tree, they'd put a couple spiles in the tree. And they brought wooden buckets with them from Europe on their ships. So they didn't have to collect and carved out old wooden knot holes. So they put the spile in their tree, and they put the bucket on the ground beneath the spile, and it would go drip, drip, drip off the end of the spile. What's the problem? What's the problem with that? Yep. It takes a long time. What else is a problem with that? An animal can come and drink all your sap. So if a deer's walking by, oh, some fresh water to drink. Sticks its head in the bucket, drinks up all your sap. Not only do you have deer spit in your bucket, but you don't have any sap left because they drank just about all of it. So they said, well, let's maybe hang these up on a tree. So they said, we got to do two things. We got to figure out a way to get them up off the ground. So they put a hook on the bottom of their spile. and then they hung it from the tree. So it would be leaning up against the tree like this. Was that an improvement, do you think?
Yes. That's cool.
Huge improvement. But guess what? Squirrels could still get in there. And birds. Birds could take a bath in there. And you still get all the ants and the moths and everything else. So they said, while they were thinking about what to do about the squirrels, they realized that there was a problem with their bucket. What happens to wood buckets over time? They rot, absolutely. And then they fall apart and they leak, and then the sap just goes all over the ground. So they're like, okay, we got to come up with something else for the bucket. So eventually somebody got smart and said, okay, let's use a metal bucket, and we'll put a hole in the edge of it, and we'll hang that on the tree. Big improvement, right? No more wood bucket, no more awkward handle. And then they said, well, what if we put a cap on the bucket? What if we put a hat on it? And so they put a cap right over the top of the bucket to keep the squirrels out. But what else does it keep out? What happened last Wednesday with the weather? We had tons of snow. We had rain and snow. It keeps all the rain and the snow out. It also keeps blowing leaves out too. Because maple sugaring can only happen when winter is transitioning to become spring. Can't happen in the summertime. Can't happen in the fall. Doesn't even happen in the late spring. It's got to be cold, cold, cold at night, below freezing at night, and then it has to warm up above freezing during the day to make this work with the trees. So they used hand-carved wooden spiles for a really, really, really long time. But what's the problem with the wooden spile?
It's broken top.
Well, this is actually carved off on purpose, so you can see the straw, you can see the stuff coming out of the tree. But what happens to a wooden spile over time?
It rots.
It rots, it gets a crack in it, and it leaks. So they said, well, you know what, we'll get smart. We'll make them out of cast iron. Those things will last forever, but they're super expensive. So they were like, well, maybe that's not the solution. And they even had the hook right on there. Right on there, right built in, but a little expensive. So then they said, well, you know what? We can do this cheaper. We'll still use metal, but instead of using cast iron, we'll use lead, and we can make them at home. We can have our own spile molds at home, and we can make them out of lead. Is that a good idea? It's a great idea, but is it a healthy idea?
No.
No way. Lead, as we know, causes lead poisoning. And then you forget why you started doing it this way in the first place if you're in contact with this a lot. So they did this for a really, really long time, up until like the 1930s and 40s.